It did not end with a contest, and no challenge was accepted. Those present would later say that nothing dramatic happened at all. And yet, within moments of their meeting, the balance of certainty shifted. Andre the Giant remained exactly where he was. Bruce Lee did not change his expression, but the space between them was no longer neutral. Years later, witnesses would agree on one point. Whatever occurred backstage that day quietly redefined what strength meant in their world. The backstage area was a study in contrasts. It was busy without being chaotic. Crew members moved deliberately, carrying equipment or checking schedules. Fighters and performers navigated narrow corridors, occasionally pausing to exchange a greeting or adjust their attire. The lighting was harsh, utilitarian. Fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead, casting shadows that shifted with the movement of people. The space felt alive with purpose, yet entirely devoid of spectacle. Here, no one performed for an audience. Here, reputation carried weight without flourish. Bruce Lee arrived quietly, as though he had no need to announce himself. He did not stride with authority, nor did he linger expectantly near those whose presence might draw attention. His movements were economical, controlled, deliberate. He adjusted nothing in his clothing, made no gestures to be noticed, and carried no expression that demanded recognition. In a space designed for function, his presence felt entirely natural, almost incidental, but there was a subtle quality to the way he navigated it. Every glance and step measured, attentive yet unhurried. Those who observed him later remarked on the calmness he brought into the room. It was not passive, it was not waiting, it was awareness in its purest form. While others around him spoke, joked, or hurried past, Bruce Lee seemed to absorb the space, noting the way people moved, how weight and posture shifted, how confidence revealed itself before any word was spoken. The environment shaped behavior. In backstage areas like this, assumptions were unspoken but rigid. Size implied strength, experience implied authority, and proximity often became a test of composure. Yet Bruce Lee did not assert himself. He did not compete for space, for acknowledgement, or for attention. He existed alongside the hierarchy of physical presence without disturbing it, as if operating by an entirely different set of rules. The hum of preparation filled the space. Equipment rattled, distant voices gave instructions, and footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. Yet Bruce Lee's presence introduced a quiet counterpoint. He did not stop the motion around him, he did not slow it. Instead, he made it perceptible in a new way. Observers would later note that the room seemed to lean slightly toward him, not in recognition but in subtle recalibration. At the far end of the hallway, a figure entered who drew immediate attention: Andre the Giant. He did not announce himself. His reputation had preceded him, and his size alone commanded focus. The contrast between Bruce Lee's quiet precision and Andre's overwhelming scale created a tension the space had not contained before. Bruce Lee noticed, of course. He did not stare, and he did not shift. He simply acknowledged a presence, as one notes a natural phenomenon. The room, however, responded differently. Eyes followed Andre instinctively, whispers began, and the energy, previously functional and routine, began to condense around these two figures without any overt confrontation. Bruce Lee did not move closer. He did not signal recognition. And yet he subtly adjusted to the presence of someone whose physical dominance was obvious. He was aware of the crowd's anticipatory gaze, of the slight imbalance in posture among those who had assumed certainty about hierarchy, and of the potential for tension to escalate simply through observation. In this backstage world, nothing extraordinary has happened yet. No challenge had been made, no words exchanged, and yet the air had already shifted. Bruce Lee's calm observation, combined with the inherent authority of his form, set the stage for what was to come, a moment that would later be described not in terms of spectacle, but in terms of quiet inevitability. He remained, as he had arrived, almost invisible. but the room, as it continued its work around him, had already begun to acknowledge his presence in a way it could not fully articulate. This was the environment in which the encounter would unfold, functional, public, and yet poised on the edge of something profound. Andre the Giant entered with the ease of someone who had long been accustomed to space bending around him. He did not announce himself, and he did not need to. His scale alone, the combination of height, breadth, and mass, demanded recognition. Every step reverberated lightly through the floor, not in threat, but in assertion of physical certainty. Those present instinctively accounted for it. Chairs were nudged aside, conversations paused, and the subtle geometry of the room shifted to accommodate him. He did not look for attention. He did not scan the room. He carried a quiet assurance born of years in the public eye, of arenas and stages, of moments where his presence alone had settled disputes before they began. The instinctive awareness of authority radiated outward from him, and those around him responded in kind. His reputation preceded him, carried not by words but by observation, a career built on dominance made visible through form and motion. Bruce Lee, already present at the periphery, did not react as others had. He did not rise, he did not straighten, he did not adjust his posture in a way that sought acknowledgement or competition. He simply observed. His eyes followed Andre's movement, not with curiosity, not with evaluation, but with precise attention to the nuances of weight, balance, and the rhythm of his gait. Each detail, though seemingly mundane, offered insight. The contrast was stark. Andre filled the room in a way that was immediately apparent to anyone watching. His body created a gravity of expectation. It drew eyes, it paused casual chatter, it subtly dictated who could move where. Bruce Lee, by contrast, existed as if in an adjacent layer of the same environment, his presence unassuming yet complete, his authority of a different kind, measured, internal, and unobtrusive. Those nearby noticed the tension this created. They were not expecting a confrontation, no one had suggested one. But the juxtaposition of quiet mastery against obvious magnitude made the space uneasy. The instinct to perform, to assert, or to comment became tempered. Observers glanced between the two men, sensing a dynamic without knowing how it would manifest. Andre paused near the equipment stacked along the wall, allowing his gaze to sweep the room. Not in scrutiny, but as a matter of habit, checking that the space around him conformed to expectation. When he noticed Bruce Lee, he registered the presence briefly, yet with little surprise. It was as if he recognized a form of authority that did not announce itself. He did not approach, he did not challenge. His awareness was simply observational. The room had already begun to reorient subtly. Conversations that had been casual grew quieter. Footsteps slowed. Whispers circulated with a new timbre. In this space, the hierarchy of size had been reinforced by Andre's physicality, but Bruce Lee's calm composure introduced a variable the audience could not immediately read. It was not a threat. It was a counterbalance. In that moment, witnesses would later recall the idea of certainty began to fracture. Authority had traditionally been visible, measurable, tangible. Andre embodied that fully. Yet beside him, Bruce Lee's presence suggested another model entirely, one where mastery was silent, where influence required no volume, and where control could exist without exertion. No action had yet taken place, no words had been exchanged, and yet the room, which had once felt functional and predictable, began to lean toward an unspoken anticipation. The weight of physical authority and the quiet intelligence of observation created a tension that was almost imperceptible, but undeniably real. This was the setting for the encounter. Andre the Giant, the living emblem of physical certainty, and Bruce Lee, a figure whose mastery demanded no announcement. Together they occupied the backstage space in a manner that would make the coming moment inevitable. Even before it arrived, it began subtly, almost imperceptibly. The first signs of tension were not in words, but in the way people moved. A crew member paused mid-step to glance at Bruce Lee. An assistant leaned against a wall, shoulders tightening ever so slightly. Whispers circulated, small, cautious, careful to avoid being overheard by either man. No one spoke directly to Bruce Lee, and no one challenged Andre. Yet the air had altered, and everyone in the room sensed it. The difference between the two men was immediately apparent to those who had eyes to see. Andre the Giant, with his immense scale, projected certainty that was simple to read: broad shoulders, steady stance, measured movements. He needed no demonstration. His physical presence alone established hierarchy. Bruce Lee, on the other hand, seemed almost removed from the conventions of observation. He did not adjust for proximity, and he did not react to the natural draw of Andre's size. He simply existed, aware, attentive, measured. The effect on those nearby was disorienting. For decades, the hierarchy of physicality had been a language they understood. Mass equaled authority, presence equaled dominance. Now that certainty was fractured. Bruce Lee's quiet composure suggested that influence need not be visible, that authority could exist without mass or volume. Observers felt the shift instinctively. Eyes darted between the two men, conversations faltered and laughter faded. Whispers began to rise, soft, fragmented, cautious. People speculated about what might happen next. Some mentioned the possibility of a test, others muttered about previous encounters in gyms or on sets. No one spoke loudly, and no one acted directly, yet the collective anticipation became tangible. Witnesses would later describe it as a kind of compression in the air, as though the room had contracted around the presence of these two forces. Andre's attention, though seemingly casual, scanned the room. He did not move toward Bruce Lee, nor did he adjust his posture aggressively. Instead, he simply occupied the space, aware of the peripheral observation his body commanded. The magnitude of his presence contrasted sharply with Bruce Lee's restraint. And yet, Bruce Lee's calm observation seemed to shift the energy without effort, challenging the assumptions of those present. Bruce Lee's gaze was deliberate but neutral. He did not stare at Andre, nor did he avoid him. His eyes followed the natural rhythm of movement around him, noting weight distribution, shifts in balance, and the subtle cues of tension in body language. Those who noticed the precision of his observation understood that he was not preparing for a confrontation. He was simply reading the room, and more importantly, reading the man beside him. Small gestures, nearly invisible, began to reveal the change. A hand paused mid-motion. A foot stepped slightly offline. A shoulder rolled back. The subtle recalibration of bodies around the two men was unconscious but unanimous. People adjusted to uncertainty in ways they could not articulate. In the past, the presence of someone like Andre had sufficed to command agreement. Now agreement felt incomplete. And then, as often happens in these moments, a remark surfaced. It was minor, almost casual, directed not at Bruce Lee but heard by him nonetheless. Someone joked about strength, about the disparity in size between the men, about who might win in a hypothetical exchange. Laughter followed, hesitant, unsteady. The words themselves were inconsequential. What mattered was that Bruce Lee heard them. He did not respond, did not shift, did not tighten his jaw. He remained still, his posture calm, his attention measured. The room registered this stillness. In an environment accustomed to motion as reaction, in which responses to insult or challenge were immediate and visible, the absence of reaction was extraordinary. The energy that had been building around anticipation now found no outlet. Observers felt their own confidence begin to falter, replaced by uncertainty they could not name. Andre remained present, observing but unconcerned. The tension was not about confrontation, it was about balance. Mass met mastery, and the room, untrained in recognizing authority beyond the visible, paused to reconsider what it had believed it understood. In that suspended moment, before words, before motion, before anything explicit, attention had already shifted. The narrative had begun. The hierarchy of expectation was quietly being rewritten. No one in the room would have described it as dramatic at the time. There was no shouting, no stance assumed, no raised voice. And yet, by the time Bruce Lee took his first step forward, the room was already watching differently. The smallest movement would carry weight, because the silence preceding it had redefined what power looked like. The moment arrived without announcement. No one spoke, and yet a challenge was present. It was not verbal, and it was not overt. It existed in the alignment of bodies, in the subtle tension that had begun to accumulate around Bruce Lee and Andre. The space between them, neutral before, now carried implication. Observers later recalled the change as nearly imperceptible. A slight compression of air, a shift in posture, a recalibration of attention. And yet, everyone noticed it. Andre did not move toward Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee did not move toward him. There was no step taken in aggression, no hands raised in preparation. Both men remained still, their presence alone enough to fill the backstage environment with tension. The silence was deliberate, not accidental, a quiet, controlled statement that required no words. The people around them responded in ways they could not control. Crew members paused mid-task, assistants stopped adjusting costumes, fighters shifted their stance subtly. Whispers fell silent. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, aware of an unspoken contract forming in real time. Something was about to occur, and it would not follow conventional expectations. The challenge was psychological rather than physical. It did not ask for a fight, nor did it demand dominance through noise or posture. Bruce Lee's calm observation, paired with Andre's immense presence, created a dynamic that was inherently interrogative. To the untrained eye, nothing had changed. To those who understood nuance, the hierarchy of certainty had already begun to tilt. Andre, for all his size, registered subtle cues in Bruce Lee's stance. The way he held his weight, the even distribution of his body, the quiet precision in his gaze, none of it aggressive, none of it flashy, signaled understanding rather than confrontation. His eyes briefly met Bruce Lee's, not in challenge but in assessment, and in that instant the silent negotiation was underway. Observers would later describe the moment as a collision of opposites, physical magnitude versus controlled mastery, expectation versus subtle defiance, mass versus movement efficiency. There was no energy expended beyond what was necessary, yet the tension was palpable. The space around them had transformed. It was no longer functional, no longer casual. Every footstep, every breath, and every gaze contributed to the unspoken dialogue. It was here, in this quiet tension, that the room first recognized the rules of what would follow. The exchange would not be loud, it would not be elaborate, it would be brief, it would be decisive. And yet, because of its subtlety, it would leave a lasting impression that no observer could forget. The silence was a test, not of courage, nor of speed, nor even of strength. The test was awareness, the ability to perceive without reacting unnecessarily, to control without demonstration, to understand without speaking. Bruce Lee did not invite action, he simply existed within it, and the implication was unmistakable. Any misjudgment would reveal itself immediately. And in that silence, the world around them seemed to slow. Every movement, however minor, became significant. The slight forward shift of a foot, the angle of a shoulder, the turn of a head, all were noted, absorbed, and recorded unconsciously by the witnesses. The room had become a kind of chamber of observation, a stage without performance, where every actor understood that restraint carried more authority than noise ever could. No challenge was issued in words, none was needed. The unspoken understanding that something would occur and that it would settle quickly was enough to orient the entire backstage world around a new axis. Those who had assumed the hierarchy was fixed began to sense the impermanence of certainty. Even Andre, for all his size and power, acknowledged the subtle shift. And then, as the room held its breath, Bruce Lee prepared to demonstrate what no one had yet witnessed. It would take less than a heartbeat, and yet the consequence of the moment would endure far longer than anyone present could fully realize. The exchange lasted no more than 4 seconds, and yet in those seconds, everything changed. It began with a subtle shift, Bruce Lee adjusting his stance, barely perceptible, as if aligning with a force no one else could see. His hands remained low, relaxed, and his eyes never left Andre's form. There was no wind-up, no outward motion intended to impress. His presence itself initiated the change. Andre the Giant, despite his immense size, reacted. Not violently, not aggressively. Simply his posture altered, a subtle dip in his shoulders, a minor rebalancing of weight. His breath caught not from pain but from interruption, an unspoken recalibration. The physical certainty he carried so naturally was momentarily suspended. Witnesses would later struggle to describe it. The change was almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. Bruce Lee did not strike, he did not lunge, he did not make a show of power. He adjusted minimally, almost as if his body had merely found the correct alignment. And in that minimal alignment, Andre's response was complete. The implied control was instantaneous and total. No one clapped, no one cheered, there was no spectacle. Yet the room was irreversibly altered. Those present sensed immediately that what had happened could not be reversed, explained away, or replicated. The hierarchy of assumption, the belief that size alone dictated authority, had been disrupted in an almost imperceptible instant. Bruce Lee did not follow up. He did not advance, did not test, did not linger. The demonstration concluded simply because it had nothing left to add. Its brevity was deliberate, efficiency, precision, and restraint. The point had been made, no embellishment was necessary. Andre, for his part, regained composure quickly. His body straightened, his gaze steadied. Yet something had shifted. Even in returning to normal posture, he carried the subtle imprint of the moment, an acknowledgement not spoken, but understood. There was no embarrassment, no loss of pride. There was only recognition, a fleeting, quiet understanding that he had met a form of mastery unlike anything previously encountered. The witnesses, too, absorbed the scene in silence. Conversations had halted entirely. Eyes had followed every micro-adjustment, every imperceptible motion. Attempts to describe it afterward faltered. Words could not capture the efficiency, the control, the sheer decisiveness contained in those few seconds. One observer later said simply, "It didn't look like anything happened, but everyone knew it had." This was the essence of Bruce Lee's mastery: control without demonstration, authority without aggression, influence without spectacle. In 4 seconds he had communicated more than words, training, or physical effort could have conveyed in minutes. The room itself seemed to exhale collectively, as if it had been holding its breath, finally allowing reality to settle. No one challenged him afterward. No one questioned what had happened. The demonstration was complete, and by design it left nothing to debate. It had not been about defeating Andre. It had been about revealing the ineffable rules of control and presence. The impression lingered. It would shape conversations, influence perceptions, and quietly redefine understanding of strength for years to come. And Bruce Lee, as always, returned to stillness. He did not seek acknowledgement. He did not claim victory. He simply existed, unchanged, leaving the space and the people within it altered in ways they would carry silently into the future. The room did not react with noise. There was no applause, no cheering, no visible relief. The demonstration had been too subtle for spectacle, and yet it had delivered its message with absolute clarity. What remained was silence, not imposed but natural, an acknowledgement that what had occurred could not be articulated through words alone. Observers felt the weight of the moment internally, their own assumptions about power quietly recalibrating. Andre the Giant stood as he had before, yet he carried a different energy. His composure was intact, his expression calm, but the small internal shift was evident to those trained to read subtle cues. His confidence, built over years of physical dominance, had encountered something unfamiliar, mastery that required no assertion. In the briefest instant, the certainty of size had met the quiet authority of precision, and found it undeniable. Those nearby reacted in small, almost unconscious ways. Shoulders lowered, eyes shifted, hands paused mid-motion. The energy that had once been defined by Andre's presence alone became ambiguous. The hierarchy the room had assumed was no longer absolute. It was provisional, dependent not solely on scale or reputation, but on the subtle interplay of awareness and control. Bruce Lee did not speak. He did not move. He remained as he had before, calm and balanced, observing the aftermath without imposing further influence. His stillness amplified the effect. By choosing not to dominate the space further, he allowed the room to process the demonstration fully, leaving no residue of ego or assertion. Observers later described a strange phenomenon, a quiet questioning of their own perceptions. What they had believed about strength, authority, and certainty no longer fit the reality they had just witnessed. Size could impress, but it did not guarantee control. Force could dominate, but it was not the same as mastery, and mastery, when exercised with restraint, could unsettle even those who seemed immovable. Conversations that followed were muted, careful. People avoided recounting the demonstration in detail, aware that words could not capture the precision, the brevity, or the impact. Instead, they spoke in fragments, glances, gestures, tentative observations. The room, once lively with preparation and casual interactions, now moved cautiously, as though testing the new equilibrium. Andre did not attempt to reassert dominance. There was no posturing, no challenge, no attempt to reclaim the certainty the room had temporarily questioned. He understood, without verbal acknowledgement, that the moment had established something unspoken but complete. His silence reinforced Bruce Lee's demonstration rather than diminishing it. In this adjustment, the broader lesson unfolded subtly. Those present realized that authority was not simply claimed, it could be demonstrated quietly, and its consequences could ripple without fanfare. The recalibration was psychological. Observers reconsidered hierarchy, presence, and the nature of influence itself. The room slowly returned to its prior function, but the energy had shifted irrevocably. Tasks resumed, equipment moved, conversations recommenced. But beneath the surface, the assumptions that had guided behavior were altered. Even casual gestures carried new weight, tempered by the awareness that mastery did not need to prove itself through spectacle. And in that silence, in that calm shift of certainty, the legacy of the moment began to form, not as a story of victory, but as an enduring reference point. Those who had witnessed it would carry the understanding forward, quietly recalibrating their sense of control, authority, and respect for precision. The demonstration had ended, but the adjustment it produced would linger indefinitely. Bruce Lee did not linger. Once the minimal demonstration had concluded, he returned to his previous position at the edge of the backstage area. He did not move closer to Andre, and he did not offer explanation or acknowledgement. There was no lingering gaze meant to assert dominance, no smile or nod intended to draw recognition. He existed quietly, unaffected by the attention his presence had drawn, as if the moment had been completed entirely within himself. Andre remained standing nearby, composed, steady, unaltered outwardly but subtly transformed inwardly. His posture returned to its neutral state, but the impression of the exchange lingered. He did not challenge, and he did not attempt to reclaim authority. There was no need. The interaction had resolved itself without spectacle, leaving an unspoken understanding between the two men. The observers around them began to resume their tasks, but attention remained. Conversations were quieter, movements more deliberate. Those who had assumed hierarchy based on size alone found themselves hesitant, uncertain of how to act. Their assumptions had been quietly disrupted, leaving a residual awareness that power and control were not solely measured by physical dominance. No one approached Bruce Lee for clarification, and none tried to provoke further interaction. The room seemed to respect the boundary he had established, though he had made no effort to enforce it. In this, his authority was evident, not because it was demanded, but because it required no reinforcement. The moment had been decisive precisely because it concluded without embellishment, without commentary, without need for validation. Bruce Lee eventually departed. He moved calmly, without rush, without dramatics. Observers noted his measured pace and the absence of ceremony. He did not glance back. His exit was unremarkable in appearance, yet the significance of the event remained imprinted on everyone present. The room, the energy, and the hierarchy had all been subtly shifted, and those shifts would persist long after his presence had faded. Andre remained. He returned to his routines, his composure intact. But the encounter had left a subtle imprint, a recognition of skill and awareness that did not need to be verbalized. It was not a submission, it was understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that mastery does not always demand assertion, and that authority can exist without volume or spectacle. The departure reinforced the lesson for witnesses. The most significant actions are often those that leave the least visible trace. Bruce Lee's influence in that space was complete precisely because it was restrained. The demonstration had required no reinforcement, no explanation, and no repetition. Its effect would linger not through story or boast, but through the subtle recalibration of perception among all who had observed it. By leaving quietly, Bruce Lee ensured that the moment remained intact, uncorrupted by ego or attention. Its impact was preserved precisely because it was allowed to exist as it was, a minimal, efficient, and controlled demonstration of mastery. And in that quiet departure, the final element of the encounter was revealed: the authority of restraint, the power of observation, and the enduring weight of action without claim. The story of that backstage moment did not survive through spectacle. There were no photographs, no recordings, no official account. What endured was the memory of those who had been present, retold carefully, quietly, often years later. Witnesses would speak of it in fragments, half-sentences, gestures, small acknowledgments, because words could not capture the precision, restraint, and subtle authority of what had occurred. The story existed less as narrative and more as impression, a quiet truth embedded in the awareness of those who had seen it. Over time, the moment became a reference point. In gyms, dojos, and training halls, the exchange was mentioned sparingly. It was not celebrated, nor did it become a parable of victory. Instead, it was invoked to illustrate something deeper: the difference between size and skill, between force and control, between what is loud and what is decisive. Bruce Lee's mastery, minimal and efficient, became a standard against which others measured understanding rather than strength. Andre the Giant's reputation continued, unchanged in its public perception. Yet among those who knew the story, his encounter with Bruce Lee carried a new dimension. It did not diminish his physical authority, but it introduced nuance. Authority, they realized, was not a singular concept. It could coexist with subtlety, acknowledge it, and yet remain intact. The encounter did not humiliate, dominate, or diminish. It clarified. It revealed a hierarchy not of muscle, but of mastery. For Bruce Lee, the moment was unremarkable in execution. He had not sought recognition, nor had he intended to assert superiority. And yet, years later, the effects were tangible. Stories circulated in whispers, how a man of slight build had unsettled one of the largest and most physically imposing figures in the world, with nothing more than presence, timing, and awareness. The lesson was clear to those who understood it. Restraint could carry authority further than force ever could. The narrative persisted because it was grounded in observation, not embellishment. Those who retold it did so carefully, preserving the integrity of the moment. Attempts to dramatize or exaggerate failed. The minimal demonstration refused to be amplified. Its power lay precisely in its brevity, precision, and silence. And for each person who recounted it, the memory carried a quiet weight, a subtle acknowledgement that mastery does not demand spectators. As decades passed, the story became a kind of legend, not for spectacle but for teaching. In circles of martial artists, historians, and those attuned to subtle human dynamics, it was referenced as a benchmark of efficiency, control, and authority. The encounter was repeated as an example not of defeating someone physically, but of altering perception and recalibrating certainty through observation and action alone. It endured because it was truthful. Its impact was not immediate, nor was it loud. It was carried silently by the people who had witnessed it, transmitted through careful recollection and subtle allusion. The minimal demonstration, the quiet departure, and the recalibrated room. All of these elements preserved the story in its original form. Ultimately, the moment became symbolic, It reminded those who learned of it that power can exist without display, that mastery is measured in restraint, and that authority can quietly redefine expectation. The encounter between Bruce Lee and Andre the Giant did not become a tale of victory or defeat. It became a touchstone for understanding the nuanced balance between presence, perception, and the enduring weight of controlled action. Years later, when people recounted the incident, they did not speak of triumph. They spoke of recognition, not of one man over another, but of the enduring clarity that arises when skill meets awareness, and when subtle mastery quietly reshapes the assumptions of an entire room. The story endured because it required no embellishment. Its brevity, precision, and silence ensured it remained uncorrupted, a lasting example of how authority can exist without noise, and how the quietest actions can leave the most permanent imprint. It was, in every sense, a legendary moment. Not because it was spectacular, but because it was complete. Complete in intention, complete in execution, and complete in the memory of those who had witnessed it.